Hi, I wanted to give a little introduction before I showed this video. And I've shared excerpts from different online things or lectures that I've given years ago. And I was looking at this one, and I remember how stressed I was during this online class because I used to work at my studio downtown all the time. And one of the main reasons was because I didn't have internet here. In fact, our house had very, very slow internet. We couldn't even like do anything like upload or download something on our computer and watch Netflix at the same time. We just couldn't. And I didn't have any internet in the studio. So we know us doing any sort of videos to post to Patreon or anything that had to do with online was a nightmare. And so a huge part of me going downtown was to have the internet down there. And I didn't even have my own internet. I was using the internet from the guitar shop. So in my studio downtown, it was like it's an arts building. So I show images from that studio a lot. And it's in the basement and it's a good space and it's affordable and all that. And it's in downtown Winston-Salem. And so there's other studios in this basement, but we can't really share internet down there because the walls are so thick. But the floors are not very thick. So we were using the internet from above us, and they had like dropped their server. So, when you do these online classes, this was like February, the very first or very beginning of February of 2023. And I didn't really even understand about, bandwidth and stuff. So I was doing this online class through Scottsdale Artist School. And so they were facilitating it. I was just sort of, kind of doing little demos and lectures and critiques and stuff. And I mean, I'm watching this video that I had in a hard drive, and I was like, I thought I'd take some clips from it, but holy cow, the internet was going in and out and in and out. And the lady who was running it kept saying, "We can't hear you." And I remember I was this like PTSD of like remembering how stressed I was. Like, I don't know what to do. And um but I thought I would just take some clips from it because, you work so hard for these classes and then they just sort of disappear into the ether, right? So this was over 3 hours. I was online, for when I was doing these month-long classes, I was doing pre-taped videos that for people to watch. I was critiquing people's work during the week. I was giving all this homework. I had a private Facebook page to give the homework assignments for people to upload their homework, all kinds of other links and resources. And it was really almost over 5 weeks because anybody that did the stuff for the fourth week, I would keep critiquing. And so when we would meet once a week on Zoom, it was 3 hours, 3 hours and 15 minutes. And so I just sort of clipped down images, video clips from this over 3 hour class. So if you see that because this is all recorded on Zoom, right? And that's also why a lot of times whenever I do online classes, I always have an HD version of my demos. Either pre-recorded or if they're done live, Scott will record me on an HD camera and then we upload those separately because Zoom does, the resolution isn't super high. So I just thought I would take some clips from this just for posterity. And I did clip out all the times when like literally the internet was going in and out. And so I thought I would just kind of give you a little bit of an explanation and just sort of post it for fun. I give a couple little tiny demos, one pastel and one oil, when I was really experimenting with using different colors and just playing with extremes and opposites and just not natural. Trying to have fun painting portraits again. So enjoy. Long talk. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for joining. I love it when people comment. I love knowing that people are out there. So thank you for your support. Sometimes being an artist can be kind of a lonely job. I mean, I have Scott, so I've always been pretty lucky with that. two artists together trying to figure it out and support each other. And I always want to be there for people who maybe don't have an artist support system. So, I'd love to meet you and love to support you too. So, alrighty, here's the video. Bye. Scott is going to be helping me. So he's just going to be sketching and drawing the whole time. And these are quick sketches. So these are figure drawings that we do on Friday. And then afterwards, he goes in with like a white pencil and he kind of plays around. Sometimes, like you can see, he's like rubbing it in. And sometimes you can actually see like he makes it look really kind of funky. But Scott will be here and he'll be he'll be looking at the chat a lot to see if you guys have any questions while I'm talking, because all of you who've taken classes with me before know that I am a talker. I talk. Today, I'm going to do a quick little pastel. So you guys see, it's in the video. So you see this thing right here, right above my head. I videoed a little bit of this pastel, and then I videoed me doing a little oil. And, when you're teaching classes, I've taught so many times classes about strictly drawing, strictly value, and I've always done it with a limited palette. I want to do something different, and I personally was in a rut. So I just want to talk a tiny bit about why I titled it Putting Fun Back into Portraits, because I was kind of at my wit's end of just doing, oil paintings, portraits, and having things constantly like just bomb. Like I had so many paintings that I was just literally throwing out and just slashing, and I was getting pretty depressed. I just had gotten to the point where I was at my limit of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so when I thought about doing, Scott's blowing his nose off. If you see him get up, he's blowing his nose. I'm like, what are you doing? I gave me the opportunity to play with color, which usually, if anyone has taken classes with me before, I would always say, just use brown and blue, just use brown and blue, just use brown and blue. And I would only focus on value. But this class, and I'm going to have all different levels. So I'm going to like talk a little bit about value and obviously drawing, but it's all about playing with colors and combinations that maybe you wouldn't have done before. And so I just started to experiment because I'm like, I honestly just did not want to paint. This is going to make you laugh, but I just didn't want to paint flesh. I just, there is this hang up as artists that we all have this idea of like, well, how do you mix this color? Well, how do you mix this color? And there's a specific right way of mixing it. And there just isn't. And I think also nowadays, I don't know if you guys have noticed it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but I definitely think that there is a movement of people like just using more expressive, pretty colors. And it's something that our eyes are attracted to. It really had this come to terms like, I think I want to give up art. I just don't want to do it anymore. It is no fun to constantly struggle trying to just do this sort of almost old-fashioned traditional painting. And so I kind of went to pastel because, when we paint, a lot of us, and I'll get to know you and your work, but a lot of us, we want so much to be perfect. We want so much to have the perfect edge, the perfect this, the perfect that, the perfect design. And it becomes a pressure. It becomes so much weight on our shoulders to paint perfectly and to just have everything be so good that, we slow down, we overwork. And Scott, even though Scott is such an excellent painter, he goes through it too. And so recently he's been like trying to experiment because he needs, as an artist, to reinvent himself a little bit. The idea is to play with, at first, opposites, because what happens too is, how do you jump from trying to be a traditionalist to somebody who really is trying to like push color? And if we don't do it in baby steps, first thing is to just work with toned surfaces. And you see how I have these green papers, right? You can use anything. You can use any green paper. I just happen to have that Claire Fontaine like green multimedia paper. But we all, you can get any sort of pastel papers or toned papers. And so then I just thought, well, I'm just going to be using warms, reds, pinks on green and see what it looks like. So I was just trying complements. Why don't we show your drawings for a second? I'm going to just show what Scott's been doing. So this is what Scott and I do every Friday, at least do these sessions, figure model. And why don't you get a little close? So these are probably about 10 to 12 minutes.
These are the 8 minutes because I hadn't put any white on it.
Oh, okay. So
That's why she could hold her hands above her head.
Wait, this model had a hula hoop, so Scott did not. But anyway, so Scott does it in just like these new pastel or generals chalks. And then now what he's doing now is that afterwards he's doing and putting this white, and then he's kind of outlining it a little bit. But he's just really creating a design that he likes. But I just thought I would show you guys what he's doing. And he's working on that Strathmore paper, the one that has his drawing on the cover. You see this little thing? So this is what I call a pastel palette. So these are the colors and the color harmonies that I chose. And to like use these colors and then transfer it to a much larger painting. So this is an oil painting. First, you figure out color harmonies. And I changed it because she wasn't green. She wasn't yellow. She didn't have a red background. Changed it completely in Photoshop. So you see, I changed it completely in Photoshop. And then, but before I started the oil, wanted to have the idea of what I was going to do. Also, I just want you guys to see that there's not like detail. I didn't go in there and do eyes. It was all about like a study, doing color notes. I put in a little palette. So I keep these right next to my palette so that when I'm mixing my colors, I am literally mixing the saturation of this. I'm literally mixing these. So there are things you can do like Gamblin. I would suggest you use stuff like this. So the whole idea is that you can like literally buy paints. So Gamblin actually has a whole new series called Radiant. So everything is called Radiant. Radiant magenta, radiant turquoise, radiant yellow, radiant this. And there are these beautiful kind of pastels that you can just use right out of the tube. I didn't use white. What I did use was I used this radiant, I think it's radiant turquoise. And so this was my white, is what I mean. So that every time I made a light value, every time I wanted to lighten the pink, I used this. White does tend to cool things down, tends to chalk things up there. And you can just do these pastels half hour, 20 minutes. It's all about like, think of yourself as like you're doing color notes, color studies to kind of get those color harmonies. Have them right next to your oil palette so that you are constantly reminded to be saturated. When I do these little pastel studies, I pretty much do the hard pastel. So I absolutely love using pastel pencils. So there's Brinzil or Conte of Paris, and especially for people who are nervous about using pastel, these don't get really in the air and you don't touch them. Meaning, so you don't get a lot of residue on yourself. Other ones that I love are Holbein. I love New Pastel. The Rembrandts are very hard. It means that when you touch them, they don't come off on your fingers or, not that much. One thing that I do love about the Conte of Paris is that you can get sticks that are the exact same, value as the pencil. So if you need to do like a side stroke. So this was going to be my palette today. All they are just cool pinks, cool reds, cool pinks, raspberry colors. They're really just cool reds. And then these light blues and this light kind of cool gray blue will really just be to neutralize or to lighten the face. And we'll see how it goes. It really is what it says. It says surface prep. And when you put it on any paper, it creates a teensiest bit of a sandpaper. It's so subtle. It's very light. It's not super rough, but it's wonderful to use for pastel. For the same paper, but painting on it, you can paint right on the paper, you guys. You don't have to seal it, but if you want to seal it, I just used a polyurethane
a clear water-based polyurethane. I would suggest 2 or 3 coats on one side and then 1 coat on the other so that it doesn't completely warp and it totally seals it. I have it in black and white and I have it in posterized. Posterized shows you what I was talking about, that bullseye, the strongest light, and everything else as it goes down, less. So I also chose a photo that didn't have a lot of details. I chose this one specifically because the eyes are so dramatic and you don't see the whites of the eyes. You don't see a highlight. I chose this because you don't see nostrils. And talking about the 5 darks of the face, you take a little slice, you cut it maybe 4 or 5 inches. It goes up behind the board. It's flat and you make this little edge. I'm using hard pastels. There's not going to be a ton that drop down, but just in case. And then you put a masking tape, any sort of tape. This is just some white tape. And I have the tape facing up. So the sticky stuff faces up. So if any pastel falls, it's like a fly trap. So you're not going to get pastel. Like if you lifted this up and it didn't have tape, pastel might fall off a little bit. One thing that I can get lazy about, but I'm decided not to be lazy about it anymore, is to protect, no matter even if I'm using hard pastel, to use this Art Guard. It's just a cream. You see how I hold my pastel pencil? I want you to see it's exactly, it's like it floats a little bit. So I can use the side of it a lot. I can put up my pencil to see is one eye higher than the other. And then remember, the eyes are slightly tilted, then everything else has to be a little bit tilted. And I want you to see how I do the top of the eyebrow all the way through the eye. It's very much like doing the sunglasses. I walk over the nose, and then I fill in the other sunglass. I'm ghosting it in a little bit. Also want you to think in angles. So this shape angles up to the eyebrow, goes over, and then angles down. So I'm putting my pencil up to my photograph. And you see how, first of all, you kind of figure out, okay, this is the socket. And you can maybe even kind of guess where the tear duct is. Tear ducts are very important to me. So I do a vertical. Where does the side of the nose come to that tear duct? And then I just go down. Where does that side of that nose come to that tear duct? And if she's at all tilted, if we 3/4, that tells us a lot. Look at how the top of her lip literally touches that shadow. It literally touches that shadow. And a lot of times a shadow could go over that lip. You just think about positive and negative. So then her lip touches that shadow. I walk down, and then that's where that top lip shadow starts. So I'm just doing these linear plumb lines. If you get this shape, you walk over the light of the nose, which is a little jump. If you get this shape, you walk over this till you get to the top of the wing. You get this edge, you walk over here to the side of the hair. Smaller jumps are easier to be more accurate. You know, jumping from the eyebrow to the top of the hair is not as accurate. So I walk over this lip. You get faster at this, but remember how you guys, I'm thinking 5 darks of the face, sunglass, underneath the nose, top lip, bottom lip, and then I walk over the light of the chin. These little jumps are easier for me to judge. And the fact that she is the slightest bit, I'm not completely straight on with her. If you can see, you can almost see a teensy bit underneath her chin, just a little bit. You can see it in the photo probably better than you can see it on the monitor. But the chin, if I elongated this, it would make her look straight on and her chin would look down. But as you see how that we see underneath her nose a little bit, we see underneath this. Those are the things that are going to make her look like we're just a smidgen looking up at her, and then shortening the forehead so that, that makes her head look like it's tilting back. So I walk over here, and then there's the dark of her hair, and I fill in. I go through the ear. This is not important. But now the green is the light of her face, the 5 darks of the face, and the framing. No information from her cheek shadow through her jawline, through her hair, through her ear. It's all filled in. This really light blue. And remember, you guys, look at the posterized. So Scott, show the posterized. So this is why I have this here, because it will be so tempting for you to kind of fill in this and then have her cheeks, or, you know, have this be as light as that, or, but it's such a little cheat sheet to show you that her forehead is getting the most light. And it goes through her nose and it's just over here. And you see how much darker her eyelids are. That's really important, is to not allow her eyelids to become anything lighter than her forehead. It's just, we have to keep the eyes in the face, inside concave. So I want you to see how I go all the way through. All the way through the sides. I'm not worried about those halftones, because if I make those too dark, there'll be too much information. See how I kind of do all the way through? I could put a little bit in the scarf, because that's also something, like as artists, we can choose, like, do we want the scarf to be the lightest thing, or do we want the scarf to be secondary? It's all about drama. It's like, what do we want? So I used this blue, and then I decided to add, see how this is just like a warmer and cooler version, what it looks like to have this pink. Oh, what is that? You see how you can experiment and create things with pastel that might be kind of exciting. I like being able to see the strokes, immediacy, and maybe not everyone is going to come out. So you also have to just be okay with like, oh, you know what? I didn't like that at all. Whoa, God, okay. Well, try again. And that's why you're not spending a ton of time on these. So I'm using like, this is a Holbein hard. I actually really like the Holbeins. The Holbeins, okay, so I've only used this really pretty pink just on the edges. We'll see what it looks like. And now I'm going to just put in a few darks. This is a Conte of Paris stick, so a little bit darker red. Just where my darkest darks are. I just don't think that I would be able to do this with oil, and that's exactly why I'm kind of teaching this to you guys. So you see how I'm just going into the dark of her eyes? It's not the whole socket, just where a few darks are, maybe just a little bit where the eyebrow is, a little bit where that dark, go over. So that middle value pink that I put in now is becoming the shadow. And if I see strokes, and if I see some of the green, hey, even better. So I'm filling in all here. Her nose is pretty dark. You see how the shadow of her nose, also, I feel like this is a practice run. So it is a test pilot type of situation where I'm mentally going over everything so that when I get to my oil, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. See, that's why I like these sticks, because you can really do the sides. Now it's up to you guys. Do you like these colors or not? But it's like, if you just give yourself practice or like fun time to play around with, well, then there's nothing to lose. There's just, so you can also go back and just like, you know, if you want to use your pencil to kind of like put a little few more edges or something. But I personally kind of like, I'm really into raspberry recently. So I really like this sort of raspberry on green, and your eye naturally vibrates. It naturally looks so pretty. So I chose this photo because of the fact that it is so very graphic and simple. What if I just... So to me, this is also something what I would say is a high key. And what I mean by high key is the values, it's not 1 to 10. So I don't have a black. I don't have a value 10. And so all the colors are more in a pastel or high key look. So now this violet is vibrating against the green. So there you go. All of my little colors in a little box so that when I choose my paints, I know what I'm going to be reminded. This is like the hardest edge right here, right? The hardest edge of the fabric.
Hey, baby.
So, okay. Let's just go in there and let's just put a little bit. So I don't see any information, but just in the darks of her eyes, we'll go over this because her eyes get such a strong shadow, the light and eyelashes. When you use really soft pastel too, it's hard. You almost have to put your head like next to the paper so you can see exactly where it's touching. But see how I use a hard pastel to kind of just like soften it a little bit? Ooh, my pastel is so thick and so handmade that there's a possibility you could put just the teeniest bit on the shadow underneath the nose, but not actually, because there is a little bit of air. Do you see how I'm putting it? Just because you know how noses kind of can create a shadow that is a little bit stronger that it casts on that upper lip. So once you put a soft pastel down, then you can go over it with a harder pastel and it kind of can blend it or soften it. And you'll see how limited it is. Okay, so remember I blocked in with this pink. I went a little bit into this, like just a red to get the hair. I did this for the lights of the face, just a tiny bit, and then a little bit of the violet, just because it's the opposite of that green. And then I went in with a little bit of this pink, just to show kind of warmth along the halftones. And then just at the very, very end, I used this super soft pastel to kind of just go in the eyes and just tiny bit underneath the nose. Personally, when I paint really small little paintings, I like to have angled or you see how this is like a little bit of an angle right here? These are perfect for little tiny paintings, little block-ins, because you can carve and you can use this angle and it's thin. I personally like using brushes that don't have a ton, like this brush. So like this brush, let me get closer. This brush obviously has a lot of hair. Well, this is going to be great for blocking in big areas, but it's not going to be great for doing subtleties in faces. Which one do you think would be easier to paint faces with? Like this one I could use to block in the hair, but this one is going to be just easier to carve, especially if I'm doing a tiny little face. Since I'm using these colors, I'm going to only put these colors down. Radiant Turquoise from Gamblin. If you do not have this, then you can just use cerulean or ultramarine blue, maybe a teensy bit of yellow or green and just white, and you mix your own. So you see I'm just squeezing this out, and that is going to be my white. So it's going to mimic this blue. Now I have to mimic the pinks, right? So I'm looking, I have these different kind of pinks. I have quinacridone rose. There's all these different kind of things. You can use permanent rose. You can use quinacridone or permanent red violet. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. Whatever you have, you can use alizarin. It's just a cool pink. Maybe this brilliant pink. What does this look like? So what I can do is I can kind of mix, look at my pastel and look at the pastels that I have next to it. See, permanent red violet might have a little bit more blue in it. All right, I might add a little bit of that. To try out this Gamblin 1980. This is a cheaper brand than the Ortis. But if you're going to be experimenting with colors, hey, I bought some, try them out. I mean, I would not recommend using Michael Harding. In fact, I joke a lot that I don't even let Scott use Michael Harding because he uses so much paint. Obviously, I have Michael Harding all over my palette. It is because you don't get to use it, because you use paint like it is like slop. Oh, you're going to make me laugh too much. No, I don't let Scott use my thing because one tube, which is $40 or $50, would be like a you know, a thing that one palette knife stroke. And I'm like, no, you cannot use it. So that's, but also I don't recommend it to students because who can use a $40 tube of paint when they're experimenting? That's why the Gamblin, you know, Radiant series and the 1980 series is amazing for this because they have such great colors now. I would consider this to be like a dry paint. So what that is just the oil that's totally out of the tube. And I like to have my blocking be on the lighter side, because the lighter you block in something, if there's any mistakes, see how I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm figuring out where the top of the head is and the bottom. Then I just kind of remember the eyes are somewhere just above middle, the nose, the mouth. This is going to be a little bit smaller because this is like more of a 6x8. Sunglasses, just like you guys see how I'm kind of scumbling it. And because I sealed this paper with polyurethane, it's not sinking in. So also, like, say you make a mistake. Okay, so like this, say I make this too big. Well, the thing with oil paint is that you obviously just paint light on top of it. But to me, I would just take a little bit of Gamsol and I would go in and I would clean up. That's just me. I don't like seeing really big mistakes. I don't like fixing mistakes with other paint. Now that would be completely opposite of the way Scott does it. But for me, like I have to kind of see the outline. So you can just do a little bit of Gamsol. See how I'm kind of angling the eye so it really does look like the shape of her eyes. I feel bad for Scott having a cold, having to help me. Every 2 seconds, he's blowing his nose. Oh no. See how it's the exact same stuff that I did with that other. I'm really trying to be as thin as possible because that allows me to have thick and thin and to possibly even keep seeing some of the green of the paper. Because why else would you use a tone paper except to have a little bit of that showing through? So you see how I'm not using any medium. The amount of paint has the oil that you have. So I just put it in and I just kind of scumble. So you can, my goal is to still be able to see some strokes. I mean, let's hope. Let's see what this freaking looks like. Okay, so now let's put this. Remember how I started off with the pastel? What happens if I put it there and I feather it and I make it thinner and thinner and thinner? Definitely much more powerful. I mean, the pastel seems to have had a lot more white in it. So will I go white? Will I add a little bit of white, or will I add a little bit of a, let's say, a warm pink to neutralize this blue? Who knows? Okay, let's see. I'm just going to fill in. And I have very little paint, so I want you guys to see. I'm really just sort of putting it in and kind of painting right up to the edges, because I can always soften edges if I want to and make it a little bit more artsy. But see what this is. You see, you guys? So it's very similar. Where's my turquoise? So it's from the same Radiant Magenta and the Radiant Turquoise. I'm trying to get away from adding white, because if I add white, it does kind of deaden it. Oh, that is that pastel in the background. Okay, so that pink and blue, but that let me see what it looks like in the face. Interesting. So you see how if I put that pink right on top of it, it kind of neutralizes it. Doesn't make it as green. The Gamblin has a radiant violet. That is going to work. Okay, so I'm putting the radiant violet. It's a violet, but it's light. Oh, that's a pretty. That is really pretty. You see how light that is? I think that's just a little bit more pleasing. It's mixing in with that. Mixing in with that blue. See, now that I have it drawn in, you see how you can kind of leave. You can kind of put down paint, and you don't have to smooth things out so much. Okay. So this would be the idea of like doing a pastel, doing an oil, figuring out how you can kind of, okay, what are the colors you're going to use? But before you get to a much larger painting, like the one I showed you of the girl with her arms out. Now I can get to a bigger brush here. Let me find, so this is like a mixed hair, right? So this is not a sable. This is an ebony short. It's just a mixed hair. I don't even know what it is, but I'm sure it's synthetic with a mixture of different kinds of stuff. I also like doing these little studies, what I would consider, they are called vignettes, which means that you don't actually paint all the way out to the edge. You use a lot, you can use dancing strokes. I just know that I have more freedom playing with color if I do these like small little studies. If I tried to do this on a large important painting, then I know I would waste canvas, energy. I'd probably get really frustrated. I don't want anything down here to be as bright as the top of her head or the top of her forehead. There is a hierarchy of what you show of as importance. I also allow myself to be leave strokes because I always, okay, I kind of primed myself with the pastel. So I'm priming myself to like leave strokes with the pastel. I want to add color over just adding white to things because you guys, I'm just going to say it, when you keep adding white to your colors, they will neutralize and get, I'm using my little carving brush because if I want to carve the background, where would I put the darkest part of her face? Remember, I don't want to do it like all over. And I also want to do it kind of like, I don't want to be precise, or you see how I want to scumble it? Because her eyelashes are creating such a strong shadow that I don't see in there. Please don't look into small little shadows like that, because I think also we are, as humans, we're trained to want to see the white of the eye. We just are, man. We just are. So you see how I'm doing the eyelash all the way down underneath the eye. And I go across, go walk over, and then do the other. So now that whole shape that probably seemed dark when I first put it in, and then it got lighter and lighter as I painted things around it. Now that is my whole socket. Oh, you don't know? So the light of the eyelid that I initially put in is now, which was originally just the shadow, right? I was massing in a shadow. Now I put the dark of that eye and now the dark of this eyebrow. And now that value and that shape is the actual light of the eyelid. And those are really a good way of just blocking in the eye. Is you do that large shape and then you do middle darks. And only if you need to will you kind of put a highlight, but the highlight has to stay darker than the forehead from your biggest shape, which is the whole eye shape, to your middle shapes, and then maybe just one little accent, but you go from big, medium, small. That is the most painterly way to think about it. Figure out what tear duct is, and I walk to the top of the wing of the nose. And I figure out where that shadow is, and I mass it in. So nothing in underneath her nose is going to be anything lighter than this. I don't go in there and lighten up in a shadow. For you guys, if you're going to spend an hour or maybe hour and a half or something, a 6x8 to 8x10 is a perfect size for a little color study. And that's just, it would be my recommendation. I don't want my hardest edge to be down here. I want this to be the drama. So these are going to be my lightest lights and darkest darks. Everywhere around it, like remember the bullseye, everywhere around it is going to be a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. So you guys saw on the posterize that the strongest light on her face is the forehead. It's not actually as bright as the scar. It's just the way paint is. So you see how I can scumble it? It's like, oh, it's just scumbling it. Well, it grays out, and it's not as light. So we have to figure out, how do we put down strokes and leave them? And the way to do that is to time yourself, to go, oh my God, I only have a half hour to do this. Okay, well, I can't keep noodling it.
Thinking of the mood or emotions when choosing color combination in these portraits. Say if you assign warm colors to positive, happy, and cool colors to sad, gloomy, and likewise.
Oh, okay. So am I putting moods to the colors? Yes, but I am not saying that cool colors are sad and that warm, cool colors are happy. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite, because warm colors can be quite hot and be fiery and maybe even be uncomfortable. So it's all about, how you see color, but also I just love harmonies in general. So when I showed you guys those Wilmer Dewing stuff, or that Walter Everett, you see how he could have a whole painting of just cool blues, but it is so beautiful. It didn't have a sad energy to me at all. Or the Wilmer Dewings, he could have a whole painting of the most beautiful girl in a dress outside, and it could be all greens, right? Just different harmonies of greens. That doesn't make me sad at all. In fact, those the greens are just, like, I don't know, there's something about magical. So, but I do think colors create emotion for sure. See, I'm not going to go dark in those lips. I want the eyes to be the darkest darks. And you see how I don't even go in and put highlights on the lids, because in relationship to everything else, eyelids are always warmer and more muted than you think. It's the exact same paper, exact same size. I just went stronger red and more blue in the background. So you see how I went in, and I just decided I needed her turban because she had jewels. I wanted it to be just a slightly different color. You see how I'm trying not to look in here. I want that initial block in to show through a lot. So I'm showing where that bone of that chin is, and just kind of scumbling the paint kind of thins it out. If I was to consider this little 6x8 as like a finished painting, well, then possibly I would work, I don't know, maybe another hour and a half or so on this, just to kind of transition these halftones, just like you saw me do in the video. A little bit more, a little bit more. See how I use my brush? I kind of put the edge up and I kind of go out to kind of create an edge. The sharper the brush, the better. And just here, I wanted to show that edge of where that fabric is coming in front of that face. I hope that this little demo helped you a lot. And what I think I'm going to do now is we can answer questions, but this is exactly what a little value color study is. It's not something, you know what you do is you do a lot of these. So I want you to see how dramatic pastel looks on just black paper, right? The exact same pastel on a paper just doesn't have that same drama. It just doesn't. So playing with opposites, but also playing with papers that are like inherently darker. So I did the same model with just blues. And this paper was actually like a kind of a white. Whoopsie. So it was just harmonies of blues and violets. So this is the exact same colors, right? But it's on this baby blue. And it's pretty and stuff, but having it on the black, I just want you guys to notice what goes on when you look at both of these. Like, which one are you drawn towards? But you see how it has almost a pastel effect because he's showing, I mean, he literally looks like a pastel, but he's using paint. So what he's done is he's used a lot of palette knife. And even if he uses his brush, then he goes in over it and kind of scratches it. Is just one value, but he goes in there and kind of creates a little bit of geometry. He has cools and pinks right next to each other. And to me, that is a very, very much of a pastel kind of impressionistic idea where you let the viewer mix. So you have a cool pink and a warm pink right next to each other, but they're the exact same value. The beginning is having your lights and darks hold together. Now, what he did was called technique, which means once that light shape completely holds together, he went in there and he played around, but nothing within the light competes with anything that's in the dark. And also, I would say that his values in his eyes and his nose, you see how relatively what you would call high key, meaning the dark in his eyes, really, if you were to give it a value, like I showed you that value scale, I mean, it's probably a 6. Underneath the nose, that's like a 5. The lips is like a 3.5, 4. So you realize it's all about just keeping those shapes solid, meaning that they hold together, they're massed in that one value, and that the values around them are in relationship. I know that's a lot to hold, it's a lot to take in, but it's all about separating lights and darks. Technique like this comes later, but if you guys can separate your lights and darks, then you're ahead of the game, truly ahead of the game. The colors will show up better on Instagram if you want to see like the violets and the greens and stuff. Happy pasteling, happy painting, and bye, have a good week.